How much does the NFL Combine matter when it comes to dynasty leagues? We'll tell you in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Matt Williamson. You can follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, let's talk a little bit about the NFL Combine, which you will be at next week in Indianapolis. I wanted to ask you about how much do you think the Combine results matter when it comes to our fantasy leagues, our dynasty leagues? Because I think there is a tendency to overreact a little bit too much to what we see in Indianapolis. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm sure we could do a whole week's worth of podcasts on this. You know, like I think smart evaluators focus on certain drills. And I know we're not in the market of, fantasy interior offensive linemen, but a great example is the short shuttle for interior offensive linemen is extremely indicative of NFL success. You wouldn't think that, but they have to change directions. They're trying to block Aaron Donald on a counter move. They're trying to get to the second level and block a smaller linebacker, so that adds up when you think about it. Now, I don't think speed in the 40 in particular is all that important for wide receiver or running back as people think. I mean, it's definitely way overvalued in my opinion. Now, I am curious. I think we're in a transitional stage in the scouting world where this zebra technology and things like that might be more indicative than your 40, because I'm not a track expert, but I know the most important thing about sprinting is your stance and coming out of your stance in your first couple steps, which is trained, and you don't get to do that on an NFL field. You don't start in a 3-point stance as a wide receiver or a running back. One drill I pay a ton of attention to, though, for dynasty reasons, just because it's on top of my head, I want to get that out, is the 3-cone for tight ends.
Yes.
That to me is very, very important. The other ones, I think that the dynasty community will overreact as a whole. And this is more of an NFL thing than a fantasy thing, but it applies. That I'm a big believer, and a lot of front offices do this, or a lot of scouts do this to some degree, that right now scouts should, in my opinion, basically put their final report in the system. In the Bears system, you follow your final report. And then, okay, if you're going to tweak it because of pro days and interviews are different, but I'm talking about testing stuff. Okay, but I urge you as the GM to go back and look at the report you put in this week when football is done. And if you altered things greatly, I really want you to explain yourself. Don't count it twice that Xavier Worthy's fast. If you watched him at Texas, you knew he was fast, and then he runs on the track and you bump him up because he is fast. Don't count it twice. So I think a lot of mistakes get made more than the other way around, more than we discover things,
I think for the most part, you need to have some level of expectation for each player going into the combine, right?
Yeah.
Like, we know Xavier Worthy's fast. Him running a great, awesome 40 shouldn't change anything, as you mentioned. You don't count it twice. However, I would say, though, that the testing does matter, right? Most of the best best players in the NFL are the best athletes. I mean, name a player in the NFL, a pretty good chance that they are the best athlete at that position. I don't necessarily care, Matt, about one specific drill, unless it's so bad that you wonder, like, if they just don't have the speed, for instance, to play in the NFL. But like, one of the things I looked at is I looked at the top 20 tight ends over the last 10 years in terms of yards per game in the NFL. So it's the guys you would expect: Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, Brock Bowers, Mark Andrews, all those guys, right? Like, so take the top 20 of them and look at their RAS score, their relative athletic score.
I bet it's very high at that position.
The median, so the number in the middle is 9.6. The average is 8.7 because our guy Jordan Reed, who played at Florida, played for Washington, was such a bad athlete that it brings the average down. But most of these guys are 95th, 96th percentile athletes. And at most of these positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, well, not so much quarterback, but running back, wide receiver, tight end, you want the best athletes. That's just generally where I default to when it comes to the combine.
Tight end in particular, the mid-round athletic upside tight ends always take a couple of years to develop anyway. So I'm a big believer in dynasty rookie drafts or in the real world. Take high upside D linemen and tight ends that are great athletes and turn them into good football players. I think there's a lot to be said for that. There was something else I want to say.
I want to tell you something real quick. I had a scout a long time ago tell me that this is kind of piggybacking what I said earlier. The elite players are usually the elite athletes, but not every good athlete is a good player. Remember that,
right?
But nearly all bad athletes are bad players, right? If you're a bad athlete in the NFL where everybody's a great athlete, it's going to be hard to be good. So if somebody tests poorly or even average at the NFL Combine, you better really believe that he's going to be an outlier, because more often than not, it just ends up not being the case.
Two things I wanted to say before that kind of slipped my mind is, now I do think if you watch tape on the dude and boy, he runs a much faster or slower 40 than I expected, well, maybe I watched the wrong tape, or maybe he had an ankle or something like that. Let's go back and see. Maybe I missed something. At least I need to cross-check things. And you kind of mentioned this before too. Usually when the results come out, the first thing I do for every drill, for every position, I want to see the top 10% and the bottom 10%, give or take, and say why. Some of them, maybe this guy's just not athletic enough to be in the league, or boy, he's really good at the vertical or the broad or whatever. Why is that? So I do like to see the outliers. And then the other thing I should have said before is, I forget that our listeners don't do this for a living like you and I do. They don't have their final reports in February for their rookie draft. Some of them are learning about these players for the first time at the combine. So maybe they don't have their opinions formed on these guys yet. I'm sure they don't,
Yeah, I think that's probably not.
Right.
But also, don't be willing to be flexible when it comes to the results here. Like I'll give you an example. One of the guys that I liked, this is a long time ago now, I really liked Devin Funchess coming out of Michigan. I thought he was going to be the next big receiver that was going to excel in the NFL. And he goes, and I think he runs like a 4.72 at the NFL Combine. And as much as I love the tape and I loved the size and I loved how physical he was, there is a cutoff for some of these guys where if you're just not fast enough, it's just not going to work in the NFL. So be flexible when it comes to your rankings. But I beg you, please don't overreact either to good times, because there's plenty of receivers that have run a 4.37 that we didn't expect were going to run a 4.37 that end up becoming bad football players. It's almost like we're using the combine to cross off players rather than to circle players.
We could get, again, this could be a week-long conversation, but changing speeds and coming out of breaks is more important than your top speed. It just is. There's a lot of sprinters that failed at the NFL level.
Yeah, if you go like the mock draftable, Matt, and you look at like the fastest receivers in NFL combine history, almost all of them are bad. Xavier Worthy might be like our only guy that I do.
Might be the best one ever. Yeah,
really. It's a pretty rough list of guys there. So I'm excited for the combine. It's always one of my favorite events. But one last thing. I think the composite scores, those relative athletic scores, we used to have the Spark scores a couple years ago. I think those matter generally more than any one single drill. I think those give you a better picture as to how these guys are going to turn out. So again, don't overreact to one drill, and I think you'll be okay.
Real quick too. Just remember, these guys right now for the last month are practicing these drills that they've never practiced before, and tell a quick story. And I know he's in great favor right now, but I remember being at the Steelers facility, and they bring every player in, and we get to sit down with them the day they come and are introduced, the day after they're drafted. And I remember explicitly asking Deontay Johnson the first day he was in the Steelers facility, I'm like, I heard a rumor that, you weren't real concerned about your 40 time. And I gained a lot of respect for him. He's like, I didn't practice it once because I didn't think that made me a better football player. He's like, I know that would probably help my draft status, but I didn't want to waste 5 hours a day on a start that's not going to make me a better route runner. I'm like, okay, I get it. That's cool.
I got another one.
Smartest move, But.
Yeah, I talked to Des Bryant the day that he ran his 40-yard dash at Oklahoma State's pro day.
Mm-hmm.
And he forgot to bring his shoes to the
the Calvin Johnson move.
Yeah, he forgot to bring his shoes, so he borrowed somebody else's cleats that were like 2 sizes too big. He didn't wear socks. He ran like a 4.52, and everybody kind of flipped out a little bit because they saw this great athlete on tape, and then a 4.52 40. Context matters a little bit when you're talking about these 40s. That's why you shouldn't overreact too much, unless it's so bad that you have no other choice. But for the most part, don't overreact.
And lastly, and now I can't help myself. I mean, of course, everyone, I'm going to put on 10 pounds for the combine. So I weigh over 200, but I'm not going to run. And then I'm going to lose 10 pounds and run at my pro day too. I mean,
we call that Bryce Young, right? Bryce Young put on like 25 pounds of water weight, didn't run, didn't do anything. So he could get over that 200-pound mark. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some veterans in the NFL, including DK Metcalf, who might be on his way out in Seattle. We'll talk about his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by TurboTax. This message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are here with Matt Williamson. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, I want to ask you about DK Metcalf because there have been some rumblings over the last several months now that Metcalf could potentially be traded this offseason. I know your Steelers were involved in some rumors last offseason. Not the greatest year for Metcalf. Pretty clearly, Jackson Smith-Njigba passed him on the depth chart.
Sure.
First of all, do you believe some of the rumblings that Metcalf could be on the move?
Sort of. I definitely think Lockett gets cut, which doesn't change things, but it makes you one less receiver, obviously. But that's, you can replace him. He's very much a declining player, and maybe I shouldn't even brought him up. But I bring that up, though, just because Seattle's one of the worst cap strap teams in the league. I thought there might be a chance a team, Pittsburgh, could pry Geno Smith away, let alone DK Metcalf. I mean, because just remember, this is a new staff and now even another new offensive coordinator that inherited these guys, that maybe considering the cap situation and the way last year went, they have enough job security that they could maybe take a step back and get their guys involved at those two key positions. So I think you could get them. I think there's a lot of receivers you could get on the market right now. And because this isn't an awesome draft class or a great free agency class, people will definitely kick the tires on those players. What do you think he costs? 3?
No, see, I think he goes for more than that because of this receiver class. Like I'm looking at like the Raiders, the Raiders who have picked, it's like 38, 39.
Yeah.
They desperately need an outside receiver. I think they've got a bunch of cap space. I could see the Raiders trading for Metcalf, pairing him back with Pete Carroll, who absolutely adores Metcalf. I do think there's 3 or 4 teams out there that would be willing to give up a mid-second round pick to go out and get him.
I'm sure we could come up with a pretty good list. I mean, trust me, I've been asked about the Steelers over and over, and I've often started with a 2, and maybe try to get a little more out of Seattle. Hey, throw in a 4 in Metcalf or something.
And
I don't know, but
I look at like Green Bay as a team that with Christian Watson probably out for the entire 2025 season, they need somebody on the outside. I think Metcalf is a perfect fit with Jordan Love.
Yeah, I do too. Again, I bet there's a lot of teams we could find out. Even New England, if you're not close, I mean, just help your young quarterback. Washington, I mean, there's a lot of them that could use them.
And
do you think he's truly on the move?
I think the hard part for Seattle is what do they want this offense to look like? Because
that's I don't quite know.
I don't know either, but it seems like they want to run the ball a lot. They have two really good running backs, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Jackson Smith-Njigba was awesome last year. And they've got a 35-year-old quarterback. So I don't know, but I think for Seattle, they've got to start taking some of their resources from offense and moving them to defense. So if they can save $25 million per year and pick up a second-round pick, I wouldn't be surprised if Seattle does entertain some trade offers.
Me either. And I do think going to Clint Kubiak implies a diverse run game. I mean, it's not going to look like the college offense that Ryan Grubb ran either. And
I don't know. Do you think Metcalf fits a Kubiak offense where it's more like in-breaking routes and yards after catch and that kind of stuff?
That's kind of what I was going to say. Not really. Yeah, he's not for everybody, that's for sure. He does corner better than, back to the combine conversation, than his 3-cone or whatever, how terrible. It was like a Tom Brady 3-cone, if you remember.
Like 7.5, something like that.
Yeah, like he's a barge or a aircraft carrier. He does come out of his breaks better than that, but I don't think he's for everybody, that's for sure.
No, and I think there's also, we saw this play out at times last year. There was a lot of penalties for a receiver. Your receiver shouldn't be getting a bunch of unnecessary roughness penalties. And I just wonder if Seattle's ready to kind of maybe move into a different direction. Let's say he gets traded. Right now, he is wide receiver 27 in our Dynasty leagues. I remember when we first started this podcast, Matt, I think he was like wide receiver 1 for the longest time in Dynasty startup drafts. Where do you value him? Because that's like a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2. What are your thoughts?
I don't know how much it would change with a new landing spot. History of guys going to new teams at receiver is kind of hit or miss. There's the Diggses and A.J. Browns that are hits, and Tyreek did well, but they're pretty special. There's a lot of them that change teams that lose a little bit of value, a little bit of production. But I do think give these teams some credit that whoever would trade for them would have a plan in place and would be a vertically inclined team. Maybe pair him with Russell Wilson wherever he ends up, or who knows? Pete Carroll, as you mentioned, maybe gets all of them. I just don't know that I would drastically ding him or raise him no matter where he ended up. I kind of feel like he is who he is. I'm not avoiding the question.
No, I think you're right, though, because he's different than someone like Stephon Diggs, where you need Stephon Diggs to get 10, 11, 12 targets a game for him to return that value. I don't think DK Metcalf needs that, right? We've seen throughout his career, you give him 7, 8 targets with a big A dot down the field, and he can become a really valuable receiver. So if it's Green Bay trading for him, if it's the Patriots with Drake May, I guess I'm not all that worried about the targets. It's more about the quarterback that he's playing with.
Yeah, I don't want him playing with Tyrod Taylor or Kevin O'Connell or, somebody like that too, Aiden O'Connell, whatever.
I'd love to see him play with like Jaden Daniels, somebody who will actually throw the ball down the field. I don't want to see him playing with Anthony Richardson, somebody who will throw the ball down the field, just not overly accurate. So
over his head, I like the Jordan Love one too.
Yeah, Jordan. See, and I just wonder if teams like Green Bay, who I don't think T. Higgins is going to hit free agency, they're not drafting anywhere in the first round where they can get an impact receiver. Would they be willing to spend some money in free agent or some draft capital and some money to go get DK Metcalf? I think there are going to be a lot of teams this offseason that are looking maybe at the Eagle model of like, hey, we need a number 1 receiver. We traded for A.J. Brown. Let's go do the same thing. Let's go get our version of that in DK Metcalf.
How about Houston? I know they don't have a ton of cap space either. But
I think that's another one. They're going away from the Kubiak style of offense, the Bobby Slowick, and a more vertical passing attack. I think that makes a lot of sense as well.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of landing spots. That's not hard.
No, it's not. It's not hard to find a good landing spot for DK Metcalf. We'll see what eventually happens. And Matt, usually these kind of trades get done in Indianapolis when the
I'm hoping some things crack in the next 10 days or so. Yeah.
We usually get some info leaking out of Indy. We'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. But I want to ask our resident Steeler expert about Najee Harris, who Many people believe is the top free agent running back on the market. Let's talk about his value next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. There's times where I miss the opening tip-off dealing with some kids, some bedtime, stuff like that, but I can jump in the middle of the game and still make my live bets. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Matt, last year in free agency, we saw several running backs switch teams and actually gain value, whether that's Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Najee Harris, top running back in the market. I know we're not expecting that, but do you think there are some landing spots where he could see a significant boost in his ADP?
Perhaps. Here's my quick thumbnail on Najee. Is obviously a big physical guy, doesn't like to get tackled, highly competitive. He is not a home run hitter by any stretch. He's not fast. I mean, he didn't even run a 40 coming out of Bama. People forget that too. But his greatest traits are his reliability and durability. He doesn't fumble. He doesn't miss games. He is very competitive. He plays hurt. And one thing I just wanted to mention, because I knew we were going to talk about him, is it's made me a little crazy. Like his rookie year is when Ben was totally shot and he would dump it to Najee a million times, and anyone could have made those catches. But at Bama, he has unusually long arms, and I think there's a lot of untapped receiver potential here. Like watching him in rookie minicamp, in his first training camp, I thought that they had some Lev Bell stuff with him in mind. You know, like run receiver routes and pluck the ball way over his head, away from his frame. And maybe he's just not explosive quick enough to pull that off at this level, but I still think there's untapped receiver stuff that's not just a dump off. Now, I was just talking about this on my Steelers show the other day. I'm like, I don't know if Najee's going to get the money he expects, 10 to 12 million, the Ramondre Stevenson contract, because this draft class is just so good. Yeah. But I also cited 2 teams that might make a lot of sense. Is kind of like the Raiders, like we just talked about. Could he be the Lynch for the Raiders and they could go other directions with their draft picks? I dislike that.
I see that a lot because Pete Carroll would love to add
he would love
back that can just play every down. And I do think that matters. And if we expect them to have a rookie quarterback, which I do, having somebody like Najee that is a good pass blocker, doesn't fumble, doesn't get hurt, does matter.
Absolutely. A durable, reliable guy, and then maybe find your next one the next year's draft or the 4th round or whatever. And I wondered, too, might the team like the Bears think he's their David Montgomery, and match him with an electric type guy?
I like that call as well. I'll give you another one. What about the Chargers? Because I don't see Gus Edwards as a free agent. J.K. Dobbins is a free agent. Yep. Both those guys struggled to stay healthy last year. I don't think Najee would be their only running back that they would have.
No,
holding the rock.
But Harbaugh would like him.
Yeah, but Harbaugh would like him because he's physical. He'll run between the tackles and he won't fumble. He'll keep them ahead of schedule. I don't know what the money's going to look like. You mentioned 10 to 12 million a year. I'm kind of on the same thing. I don't think he's going to get that, but I do think there's a bunch of these teams that have cap space and need to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think you could do worse than Najee Harris.
I do too. I mean, especially the other thing I want to mention too is Arthur Smith's a big zone guy, outside zone guy. Najee isn't. No. They inherited him, and he's much more of a pulling guard, man blocking scheme type of back. So pay attention to that with landing spot as well. But I pulled that 10 or 12 out because that's what Mondre Stevenson got a year ago. And I thought if I was his agent, that would be my jumping off point.
That's your target. Like that's where you want to try to get. Let me just run through a couple other teams that I could see potentially looking in the running back market. Washington's going to have like $100 million in cap space.
Yeah.
They release a couple guys. I know they have Brian Robinson, another Alabama running back, we saw James Conner go from Pittsburgh to Arizona playing under Cliff Kingsbury. Do you think Najee with Cliff Kingsbury would work?
I have no problem with it. I mean, he wouldn't have as much of the backfield as you'd love there, but I think he's better than Brian Robinson.
What about a team like the Giants? The Giants have...
I was thinking about them too. Really different than Tracy.
Really different than Tracy in a good way, though. Tracy is a home run hitter. Najee could be the guy that between the tackles. And again, like the Raiders, I've got to assume that a rookie quarterback's going to be there starting probably a bunch of games. I don't think a duo of Tracy and Najee's all that bad.
No, I don't either. And I don't think it would influence his stock all that much. Like hurt his dynasty or help him all that much. That offense has some untapped potential. Yeah. I mean, Andrew Thomas stays healthy, blah, blah, blah. I have to ask you about the Cowboys, I guess. But
I was actually going to ask you about the Cowboys, but that's fine. The Cowboys want to be a more physical downhill rushing team. I guess the thing for me is, do they go out and pay Najee, who has a bunch of wear and tear on his tires, or do you just bring back somebody like Rico Dowdle, who played really well down the stretch? Probably is going to cost half of Najee. Yeah, that's the only thing. Maybe they view Najee as a significant upgrade over Rico Dowdle, but I got to believe that Dallas is looking for their next running back in the first 2 days of the draft.
Yeah, and I wonder, it's easy for me to look through a Steeler lens, you through a Cowboy lens. Yep. And, we're speaking for the Bears and Giants and Commanders and Raiders. They might just come to the same conclusions too.
That's why I wouldn't be surprised, Matt, if it's something like we saw last year where Joe Mixon went from like the Bengals to the Texans, where it's a team that we're not even expecting, maybe a team that already has a running back, and they just view Najee as even a tiny bit of an upgrade. And now he ends up on the Bengals instead of Chase Brown being the every down. I don't know. I'm not ruling out anything with Najee. I could see his dynasty value right now. He's RB 20. I could see that dropping like a rock down to RB 30 if he lands in a committee. But I also could see it going up a couple spots if he ends up in a good offense without much competition.
I do think if it drops, I might become a buyer. Okay. Because wherever he lands, I think they'll like his style of play and trustworthy and stuff coaches love.
I was going to say, he's a type of running back that NFL coaches adore. That's going to lead to him being on the field a bunch.
He's a little bit of a weird dude, though. But oh well. Yeah, he's not the only one in the league.
No, he's not the only running back in the league. That's all right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, Kate and I are going to continue to preview the 2025 running back class. We're going to talk about Omari and Hampton, do a little profile into him. Nice. Friday, we're going to do Caleb Johnson, so make sure you guys are tuning in for that. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Matt on Twitter @WilliamsonNFL. I'm @Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.